Awesome. Well, hi everyone. Today I'm with Marc Azoulay, and he is a psychotherapist and founder of Men's Therapy Online. So, welcome, Marc.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be on the show.
Great. Thank you. So, Marc, we've got 10 more minutes. What's one thing you would love for the world to know?
Yeah, so the thing I want to talk about is resentment, and I think the hidden cost of niceness. I run a company called Men's Therapy Online. I work with a lot of men in therapy online, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I see over and over again with so many of these dudes, especially fathers, husbands, is that they're carrying a lot of resentment. They're often saying yes a lot, right? But there's always this tax that they pay. And, I think their wives also carry resentment too. And I think it's like a lot of couples don't often talk about how toxic this resentment can be. I think a lot of couples don't really have the communication skills of how to, empty out the resentment buckets. And I see this to be the number one case of relationships falling and moving to divorce. So I appreciate the outlet here to be able to talk about it in a little bit more detail.
Wow, wow, wow. I can totally see that. That's such an interesting point. So, how did you discover this?
Yeah, so I think both in my work, right, just seeing guys having all these resentments and all these people where they would bring out all these stories from years and years and years ago, and you probably see that in your work too, right, where you have parents
Yeah.
talking and they're upset about something that happened 15 years ago, and that's resentment, right? I mean, resentment is just
Yeah.
for things that never really get resolved. But what happens when you keep stacking those on top of each other over and over again, you erode trust. You erode trust,
Mm.
you erode respect, and ultimately the kind of foundation of their relationship starts to fall out. And if it's not talked about, it can become quite poisonous. And I know this is also my personal life. I'm recently married, and during my dating, I had some nice guy tendencies. My work we call the nice guy is this resentment building, yes man type of archetype, right? And I'm recovering from that. I can still fall into it from time and time again, but
Yeah.
the idea is that I was saying yes, and I was convincing myself that I was doing things for my partner from a pure place, a place of
Mm.
altruism, a place of
Mm.
love, a place of complete commitment and devotion to her. And those things are great ideals. I mean, like I think we want to feel that towards our
Yeah.
partners and towards our family members, but in real life, it's way more nuanced. I think it's way more complicated than that. So I was holding myself to the standard of like, oh, I'm going to do all these things, and I'm never going to ask for anything in return. But when I
Mm.
was, causing resentment in my wife, I was being charged a resentment tax, right? So every time that I would say, yes, honey, I'll do that, or I'll, skip the gym today to help you with whatever, or, I'll allocate more of our finances towards X, Y, and Z product without having a conversation and just saying yes right away. I was starting to kind
Mm.
of shoot these holes in our relationship. And we had to really address that before it got worse.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's very subtle in a way. So, what is the first step that someone might take?
Yeah, so the first step is mindfulness. I'm sure it's been talked about on this show, right? But just to really go quick into it, it's paying attention to yourself on purpose, right? So paying
Mm.
attention to what you're feeling, both emotionally. I think for a lot of men, we're not in touch with our emotions, so often we're paying attention to our thoughts. You know, so if you're promising your partner or your family member or somebody at work something, and there's a negative feeling or thought that happens right after it,
Mm.
maybe it's something in the pit of your stomach. Maybe it is a negative judgment towards them. Maybe it's a, kind of a shot of grandiosity about yourself. It's like, oh, I'm helping them because they can't help themselves, right? Or, obviously they're not good at organizing, so I have to come in and save the day.
Yeah.
You're building up that resentment. So I think really trying to catch it in the moment is critical because our body knows, all right, our brain and our emotions, we know when we're starting to charge people that resentment tax.
Yeah. So good. And what's a common obstacle that people face?
So, noticing it is one thing. I think there's an obstacle there where, a
Mhm.
lot of people, especially if you were raised in I see it with a lot of my like Christian and faith-based clients, right? Like kind of a very moralistic structure. If you're raised in that, the idea that you would have negative feelings towards your partner can feel very shameful,
Mm.
or God forbid towards your child, it can feel very
Mm.
shameful. So I think there's an obstacle there of just being able to be like, you know what? This is human. This is normal. I'm going to feel the full breadth of human experience. I'm going to feel anger and grief and sadness and jealousy
Mhm.
and all of those things. That doesn't mean I'm like a bad person. So there's an obstacle
Yeah.
there of just being able to accept those feelings without judging yourself for them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a therapist. I've been doing this for, over a decade, and I definitely get angry at my wife. I definitely feel grief. I definitely am jealous of her, right? I mean, that's part of
Yeah.
being alive. So hope to normalize that. So I think that's the first obstacle. But the biggest obstacle is talking about it. So you can notice all you want. You can do all your mindfulness, and that is helpful, right? Like it is helpful to be aware and to try to change your patterns. But at some point, you got to tell somebody about it.
Mm.
And this thing being a relational pattern, you have to solve it in relationship. And I
Yeah.
think that's difficult for a lot of people, right? Especially if you didn't grow up in a family where you could talk about negative feelings. You might be really clumsy. You might
Mm.
get elevated. You might, raise your voice. Obviously don't cross any bounds and break anything or whatever, but it might be very
Mhm.
activating and very shameful to disclose that you've been feeling a lot of resentment in your relationship. So
Wow.
right. So yeah. So like I think what can be helpful is going to a couples counselor, someone that can mediate a
Hmm.
conversation.
Sure.
With my wife Caroline, I find using metaphor. So I mentioned before, but like the resentment bucket, that's like a shorthand that we use. Where
Yeah.
we've had a meta conversation of, hey, sometimes I build up resentment in this bucket, and I have to empty it every
Mhm.
once in a while. So now that Caroline knows that about me, I will say, hey, can I empty out the resentment bucket? And I say it in kind of a jokey, fun way, and
Yeah.
I ask her consent if she's open to talking about it. And she can say no. If she says no, I'll say, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I'll ask you again tomorrow if you're in a better mood.
Yeah.
And if she says yes, she knows the type of conversation that we're going to have.
Hmm.
I think our foundation is strong enough that it doesn't come across as me trying to bully her or be mean. It's just like, hey,
Yeah.
it's just like, deal with this thing that's building between us. And it has
Yeah.
brought us closer every time that I've been able to empty out that bucket.
Oh, wow. That seems brave in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, I think it
Yes.
takes a lot of courage to do
Yes.
that. But I will say again, for the men out there, because I see this a lot, right? A lot of guys will say, "Oh, I don't want to share my resentment with my wife because I don't want to hurt her, right? Or I don't think
Hmm.
she can handle it, or
Mm.
I don't want to make her day worse because her life is so hard." I think that's noble, right? We don't want to hurt our partners, but I'll tell you,
Yeah.
dude, the women in our lives, they have way more emotional capacity than we do, like
Yeah.
significantly more. And not only that, they will feel closer to you if you
Yeah.
show them more of yourself because what they want is not just only positivity. I think
Yeah.
men want positivity. Women want
Yes.
honesty. Women want you to be honest, good, bad, and ugly,
Mhm.
no matter what. So even if
Yes.
there's an ugly part of your personality that you're not proud of, the women in your life really actually will feel closer to you if you share resentments again in a mutually respectful way, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
for a dude so mind-boggling to think about because we're like, oh, it's a bad thing. Why would I bring a bad thing to my relationship?
That is amazing. I feel like you should do a workshop for women because I feel like you're really cracking back, kind of opening up a little bit of the secrets. So how do I know if I'm doing it right?
So I think you do it right if that base level stress and disrespect goes down. I think
Yeah.
if you look at people, again, I can speak from my own experience as well as many of my clients that have been chronic resentment carriers. We can
Mm.
look like we are, grumpy, right? You can just be kind of
Yes.
off. You can feel numb. Maybe you're using a maladaptive coping strategy, which is like, drinking or porn or,
Yep.
video games to push all that down.
Wow.
You can feel kind of short or irritable. Every time your wife or partner talks, you can have like, be kind of like dissing them in your head or insulting them,
Ooh.
right? Like building up, like putting, I tell my guys, it's like, putting bullets in the chamber, like you're just like kind of stewing. So if
Yeah.
that goes down, then you're probably doing it right. If your base level, crankiness starts to decrease, then you're certainly on the right path.
That's so good. I think, stereotype of grumpy old man, but yeah, there's even like a posture, like kind of maybe your back slouching and just like, and for sure, women, I mean, we can feel the resentment when it's there. So you might think that not talking about it is helping, but your wife is probably noticing it and giving you some trouble over it anyway. And that's so
100%.
amazing. I love how you're talking about just like that mindfulness. And I just came up with something also to share with parents. And I think it goes exactly with what you're saying. It's like, first notice and then name a feeling and then relate. So, notice where you're feeling that resentment. And I think it's such a powerful piece because when you first opened up, you were like, yeah, it's the other side of being nice, which is like, oh, so, there's so much temptation there. It's fascinating. Can you just real quick to wrap up, like why do people feel like they have to be nice, especially men?
Yeah, well, I think as men, I think especially in modern culture, we've been told that we can be very violent and destructive. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of modern men, especially talking, millennials and Gen Z,
Yeah.
who I work with more so, are afraid of our power. So we
Mm-hmm.
keep a lot of that contained because maybe we were bullied growing up. Maybe we saw
Yeah.
older men and were intimidated by them. Maybe, many of us are children of divorce and saw male aggression and male anger destroy our families. So I think as
Yeah.
a generation, a lot of us are traumatized by aggression. So we do the 180, but there's something that's
Yes.
in AA all the time, which is, the opposite of sick is still sick. And I think
Yeah.
that is kind of our generation's burden to work through as men,
Wow.
is to figure out how to use our power, honorably and towards
Yes.
compassion instead of just being nice and being fake.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think you're so right. I think it's a counterfeit to being honorable. So that just gives me the chills. That's really a beautiful conversation. And so that is our time, but I'm going to make sure to include your information in the description. But what a lovely conversation. And I'd love to someday talk more.
Great. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks.